This girl reveals the location of a millionaire's missing son, but everyone wonders, is he even alive? And when they arrive where the girl said the boy was, they are shocked by what they discover. Please comment and rate my story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The scream sliced through the humid afternoon air like a razor, echoing through the brick streets of Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, at precisely 3 p.m. Damon Valerius, 52, nearly knocked over his coffee cup as he stepped away from the window of his luxury condo. It was always at the same time, always with the same desperate intensity. For 3 weeks straight, that sound had been coming from the Victorian house across the street, a faded yellow 2-story building with peeling blue window shutters that contrasted sharply with the modern elegance of his building. "Must be a kid throwing a tantrum," he muttered to himself, straightening his tie before returning to work. As the owner of Valerius Construction, one of the largest companies in the region, Damon was used to solving complex problems, but he preferred to keep his distance from other people's dramas. Especially after 5 years of living alone, ever since he lost his wife Marilyn on a rainy night, he preferred not to remember. Across the street, inside the Victorian house, Lily cowered in the corner of the kitchen, her 4 years of age insufficient to understand why her Aunt Carol hated her so much. The 38-year-old woman firmly held a metal spoon she had heated on the gas stove, her eyes red from the alcohol, fixed on the girl who trembled before her. "You're a plague on this house," Carol hissed, her voice slurred from the bourbon she'd been drinking since noon at Tony's bar. "Because of you, my sister is gone. Because of you, I lost everything." The spoon came down hard on Lily's small arm, leaving a red mark that would join the other scars that dotted her thin arms. Lily bit her lip to avoid screaming louder. She had learned that screams only infuriated her aunt more, who used to work at City Hall before being fired for constant absences caused by her addiction. The girl closed her eyes and tried to remember the soft voice of her mother, Joanne, singing that lullaby before she went to sleep. It was all that remained of her now, fragments of memories and a melody that insisted on echoing in her mind during the most painful moments. "Stop whining," Carol grunted, putting the spoon back in the drawer as if it were the most natural gesture in the world. "Go to your room, and I don't want to see you until tomorrow. And if you get charcoal on the walls again, you'll see what real punishment is." Lily ran to the small room at the back of the house, a stuffy space with an old bed and a crucifix on the wall. There, she curled up in the thin sheet and began to hum softly her mother's lullaby, the only thing that still comforted her. She didn't know that, across the street, someone had finally paid attention to that melody. Damon stopped reviewing contracts when he heard the faint but distinct sound. He knew that lullaby. Marilyn used to sing it when she cooked, a folk song about free birds, but where was it coming from? He approached the window again, his eyes scanning the facade of the Victorian house. One of the back windows was ajar, and from there came that childlike voice, trembling but persistent. For the first time in 3 weeks, Damon felt something other than simple annoyance. There was something in that voice that touched a sensitive chord in his chest, something that reminded him of responsibilities long buried under layers of work and isolation. Next door to the Victorian house, Maristela Mary Santos, a 61-year-old retired schoolteacher, was watering her begonias when she heard the girls singing. Unlike Damon, she could no longer ignore the signs. During her 40 years teaching elementary school, she had developed a sixth sense for children in distress. And that voice carried a pain that made her heart ache. "That's strange," she thought, observing the windows of the Smith house, the family she had known for decades. Carol had always been problematic, but since she had taken custody of her orphaned niece, something had changed in the air of that house. The girl never played in the yard, never ran through the streets like the other children in the historic town. Mary dried her hands on her apron and made a decision. The next morning, she would pay a courtesy visit to her neighbor. It had been a long time since she had properly talked to Carol, and maybe it was time to get to know little Lily better. Meanwhile, Damon remained at the window, an uncomfortable feeling growing in his chest. The lullaby had stopped, but something in those few minutes had awakened memories that he preferred to keep dormant. Memories of Joanne, his former employee who had quit abruptly 5 years ago, a few months before Marilyn's accident. Joanne was a gentle woman, always humming as she organized the construction company's files. Then suddenly, she had simply disappeared from his life, leaving only a formal resignation letter and many unanswered questions. He had never thought about her again until he heard that familiar lullaby echoing from a house where a child seemed to suffer in silence. The sun began to set over the mountains surrounding Harper's Ferry when Lily finally fell asleep, exhausted by pain and fear. Her little fingers clutched the sheet, and in her dreams she flew like the birds she secretly drew on the kitchen walls with pieces of charcoal found in the yard. Across the street, Damon closed the curtains and tried to get back to work, but he couldn't concentrate. Something had changed that afternoon, something he didn't yet fully understand. For the first time in years, he felt that maybe it was time to pay attention to what was happening beyond his own windows. Night fell over the historic town, but the echo of that lullaby continued to resonate in the mind of a man who had spent 5 years running away from his responsibilities, and a retired schoolteacher who had never been able to ignore the suffering of a child. The next morning brought with it the aroma of fresh bread from the local bakeries and the typical bustle of Harper's Ferry, awakening for another day. Mary put on her best floral dress and combed her grey hair with extra care. There was something in that child's voice that didn't leave her alone, an echo of hopelessness that she recognized from her years as an educator. At 9 o'clock sharp, she knocked on the door of the Victorian house. The sound echoed through the silent interior until shuffling footsteps approached. Carol opened the door with a swollen face and red eyes, clearly suffering the effects of the previous night's drinking. "Good morning, Carol," Mary said with her gentlest smile. "I've come to pay a courtesy visit. It's been so long since we've really talked." Carol hesitated, running her hand through her unkempt hair. "Oh, Mrs. Santos, it's not a good time. The house is a mess." "Nonsense, dear. We've been neighbors for so long." Mary took a step forward, forcing Carol to retreat. "And I'd really like to meet your niece. I hear she's an adorable little girl." Carol's face hardened for a moment before forcing a weak smile. "Lily is sick. High fever. Best not to get close." At that moment, a soft noise came from the kitchen, the sound of something being dragged on the floor. Mary pricked up her ears, immediately recognizing the sound of a child trying to move silently. "Maybe I can help," the teacher insisted. "I have experience with sick children, raised 3 of my own, you know how it is." "No need, no," Carol replied quickly, blocking the entrance with her body. "I've already taken her to the doctor. It's just a cold. It'll pass soon." Mary noticed Carol's nervous hands, the way she avoided eye contact, and especially the strong smell of alcohol that emanated from her even so early in the morning. All the signs she had learned to recognize during decades of dealing with troubled families. Across the street, Damon watched the scene from his window while he ate breakfast. He had woken up earlier than usual, disturbed by confusing dreams where a child's voice mingled with memories of Joanne. When he saw Mary at the door of the Victorian house, a strange curiosity swept over him. The teacher finally said goodbye to Carol, but not without casting an investigating look into the interior of the house. There was something deeply wrong there, and her experience told her that a child was suffering. As she walked back to her house, she decided that she needed to find a way to verify her suspicions. Inside the Victorian house, Carol slammed the door shut and went to the kitchen, where she found Lily crouched behind the table trying to hide. The girl had tried to reach a glass of water from the sink, but her height did not allow it, and she had knocked over a chair in the process. "Didn't I tell you to stay in your room?" Carol growled, her irritation intensified by her hangover and the unexpected visit. "I was thirsty, Aunt Carol," Lily murmured, her big eyes fixed on the floor. "Thirsty?" Carol laughed bitterly. "You want water? Then go get it from the backyard. And since you like to make so much noise, you can stay out there until I decide you can come in." Lily went out to the small backyard, a space surrounded by high walls and dominated by a single apple tree. There, she sat on the ground and began to draw with a piece of charcoal she had found near the gas stove. It was always birds, small, big, some flying, others perched on imaginary branches. Each stroke represented her dream of freedom, of flying away from that house where pain was her only constant companion. The hours passed slowly. Carol had locked the back door, leaving Lily in the backyard under the strong midday sun. The girl began to feel dizzy, but she knew that knocking on the door would only result in more punishment. So, she began to sing softly her mother's lullaby, the melody being her only source of comfort. It was that melody that reached Damon's ears again. This time he couldn't ignore it. There was something too familiar about that voice, that specific lullaby. He picked up his cell phone and, almost without thinking, began to record. He didn't know exactly why, but an instinct told him that he might need that evidence. As he recorded, fragments of memories began to fall into place in his mind. Joanne hummed that same lullaby while she worked. Joanne, who had been an exemplary employee until she disappeared abruptly. Joanne, who always spoke fondly of her little girl, a girl named Lily, Damon murmured, the cell phone trembling in his hands. Joanne's daughter was named Lily. The realization hit him like a punch to the stomach. The child suffering in the house across the street was the daughter of his former employee, the gentle woman who had worked for him for 3 years before simply disappearing. How hadn't he made that connection before? Damon put away his cell phone and began to walk back and forth in his apartment. He vaguely remembered Joanne mentioning family problems, a sister she didn't get along with, financial difficulties. But he was so absorbed in his own problems at the time, the growing conflicts with Marilyn, the problems at the company, that he hadn't paid proper attention. Now, 5 years later, Joanne's daughter was across the street, and from the sounds coming from that house, she wasn't in a good situation. The guilt that Damon carried for the loss of his wife multiplied, now including regret for not having helped Joanne when she clearly needed it. At 3 o'clock punctually, the screams started again. This time Damon didn't step away from the window. He watched with growing horror as, through the kitchen window of the Victorian house, he saw a female silhouette moving aggressively. He picked up his cell phone again and began to record, this time with more determination. What he saw through the cell phone screen made him nauseous. Carol was holding something in her hands. It seemed to be a kitchen utensil, and gesturing violently in the direction of a small figure that he could barely distinguish. Lily's screams echoed through the afternoon, and this time Damon couldn't pretend they were just childish tantrums. When the silence returned, he remained at the window for a few more minutes, his heart pounding in his chest. He had just witnessed something that would change everything. The question now was, what would he do with this information? That night, Lily slept on the floor of the backyard, where Carol had left her as punishment for making too much noise during the afternoon. The girl curled up in her own shirt and looked at the stars through the branches of the apple tree. In her 4-year-old mind, she made a silent wish to her mother, wherever she was, that someone, anyone, would take her away from that place of pain. Across the street, Damon couldn't sleep, tormented by the certainty that he needed to act, but paralyzed by the same emotional inertia that had consumed him since Marilyn's departure. 3 days had passed since Damon discovered the child's identity, and guilt consumed him like a slow fire. During those days, he had systematically documented the episodes of violence, always at 3 o'clock, always with the same methodical brutality. His collection of videos and audios grew, but his courage to act remained paralyzed by the same cowardice that had haunted him since the night he lost Marilyn. On that Thursday morning, Mary made a decision that would change the course of everything. She had spent the night awake, tormented by the certainty that a child was suffering just a few feet from her home. Her 4 decades as an educator had taught her to recognize the signs, and all of them were present in the Smiths' Victorian house. She decided to approach the situation differently. Instead of attempting another direct visit to Carol, she opted for a more subtle strategy. At 7 in the morning, she positioned herself in the side yard of her house, the place from which she had the best view of the backyard of the Victorian house. What she saw horrified her. Lily was sitting under the apple tree, completely alone, wearing only a torn t-shirt and underwear. Her small arms were marked by obvious burns, some still red and inflamed. The girl was drawing on the ground with a piece of charcoal, creating shapes that Mary recognized as birds. "My God," whispered the teacher, her hands trembling as she held the fence that separated the yards. It was worse than she imagined. Much worse. Lily looked up and saw the lady watching her. For a moment, the two stared at each other in silence. Then, to Mary's surprise, the girl smiled, a weak but genuine smile, and waved shyly. "Hi, Grandma," said Lily with her tiny voice, using the affectionate term she gave to all elderly ladies. "Hi, my dear," replied Mary, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Are you okay?" Lily looked quickly at the windows of the house before answering. "Yes, I am. I'm just drawing birdies." "That's nice. Do you like birds?" "I like them a lot." "They can fly wherever they want," replied the girl, her big eyes shining with a sadness that broke Mary's heart. At that moment, Carol's harsh voice echoed from inside the house. "Lily, where are you, girl?" The terror that instantly took over the child's face said everything Mary needed to know. Lily got up quickly, wiped her hands on her shirt and ran into the house, but not before looking once more at Mary with an expression that screamed for help. Mary remained in the yard for a few more minutes, processing what she had seen. The burns, the fear, the way the child reacted to her aunt's voice. Everything confirmed her worst fears. She could no longer pretend she didn't know what was happening. Meanwhile, across the street, Damon had witnessed the entire interaction. Through his window, he could see the Smiths' backyard partially, and the sight of the marks on Lily's arms made him sick. For the first time in 5 years, he felt a genuine fury burning in his chest. Joanne had trusted him in some way, even if indirectly, even if he didn't know it at the time. She had left her daughter in the care of a family who lived in the same town where he lived, and now this child was being tortured while he watched from his comfortable window, paralyzed by his own cowardice. At 11 in the morning, Mary made a courageous decision. She put on her best dress, took a tray of homemade cookies she had prepared as a pretext, and headed to the Victorian house again. This time, she wouldn't take no for an answer. Carol answered the door reluctantly, clearly annoyed by her neighbor's persistence. "Mrs. Santos, I already told you it's not a good time." "Carol, honey, I brought some cookies I made yesterday," Mary interrupted firmly, "and I insist on getting to know little Lily better. As long-time neighbors, it's our duty to support each other." Before Carol could protest, Mary had already entered the house, using all the authority that decades in the classroom had given her. The interior of the Victorian house was dark and smelled of mildew mixed with alcohol. Old and poorly maintained furniture occupied the living room, and there was a heavy atmosphere that made the air seem difficult to breathe. "Lily is sleeping," Carol lied, blocking the way to the back of the house. "What a pity." "Maybe another time then," said Mary, but her experienced eyes had already catalogued several disturbing details. Dark stains on the kitchen floor that seemed to have been poorly cleaned, a metal spoon left on the stove, and mainly small charcoal drawings on the walls that had clearly been made by a child. At that moment, a low sound came from the direction of the kitchen, a muffled sob, almost imperceptible. Mary and Carol froze. The silence that followed was tense and revealing. "Must be the neighbor's cat," Carol said quickly, but her voice trembled slightly. Mary smiled and nodded, but had decided that she had seen enough. "Well, I'll let you rest then. But Carol, remember that I'm always here next door if you need anything. Anything at all." Mary's tone made it clear that it wasn't just a casual offer of help, it was a subtle but direct warning. After the teacher left, Carol slammed the door shut and went to the kitchen, where she found Lily huddled behind the gas stove trying to hide. The girl had cried when she heard Mary's gentle voice, remembering the kindness she had once known. "You were making noise," Carol accused, her eyes already shining with familiar fury. "No, Aunt Carol, I didn't make noise," Lily protested, but her small voice sounded weak even to her. Carol grabbed the metal spoon that was on the stove and put it directly in the flame. Lily recognized the ritual and began to tremble. She knew what was coming next. "You want to attract attention, don't you?" Carol hissed as the spoon heated up. "Want the neighbors to come here asking questions? Think I don't know how to take care of you?" Across the street, Damon had positioned his cell phone on the window and was recording again. This time he managed to capture not only the sounds, but also partial images through the kitchen window. What he saw made him make a decision that would change everything. He could no longer be just a silent observer. Joanne had been a good person, a dedicated employee who always spoke of her daughter with love. This child was his responsibility now, whether he wanted it or not. While Lily suffered another episode of systematic torture, Damon made a call that he hadn't made in months. He called Dr. Robert Bob Mendez, his personal lawyer and old college buddy. "Bob, I need your help with a delicate situation," he said, watching through the window as Lily's screams echoed through the afternoon. "It's about a child, and I think it could be a matter of life and death." That night, after Carol fell asleep drunk on the living room couch, Lily managed to sneak out to the backyard. Her new burns ached, but the physical pain was less than the pain in her heart. She sat under the apple tree and looked at the stars, softly singing her mother's lullaby. What she didn't know was that, for the first time in months, someone was truly paying attention to her suffering. And that, in the next few days, her life would change in ways she couldn't even imagine. Dr. Robert Mendez arrived at Damon's condo on Friday morning with a grave expression on his face. The two men had been college classmates almost 3 decades ago, and Bob knew well the emotional isolation that his friend had built after the loss of his wife. Therefore, the urgent phone call the night before had surprised him so much. "Damon, I need you to tell me exactly what's going on," said Bob, sitting in the condo's spacious living room. "You talked about a child in danger, but I need details." Damon poured coffee and positioned himself near the window, the place that had become his obsession in recent days. "The girl who lives in the house across the street is the daughter of a former employee of mine, Joanne Smith. She's being mistreated by the aunt who's taking care of her." "Mistreated how?" asked Bob, taking a notepad from his briefcase. "Burns, daily screams, neglect." Damon paused, struggling with the words. "I have recordings, Bob. Evidence of what's happening." Bob was silent for a moment, processing the information. "Damon, this is very serious. If you have evidence of child abuse, you need to contact Child Protective Services immediately." "I know," Damon replied, running his hands over his face. "But there's something else. Joanne worked for me for 3 years. She quit abruptly in 2019, a few months before Marilyn's accident. I never understood why, but now you feel responsible," Bob completed, understanding the emotional complexity of the situation. Damon nodded. "If I had paid more attention at the time, maybe I could have helped. Maybe Joanne wouldn't have had to leave her daughter with that woman." At that moment, the familiar sound of screams echoed from the house across the street, even though it was only 9 in the morning. Both men turned to the window, and Bob could see the expression of anguish on his friend's face. "This happens every day?" he asked, horrified. At 3 in the afternoon religiously, but sometimes at other times too, Damon replied, picking up his cell phone. Want to see the recordings? Bob watched the videos in growing silence, his face paling with each scene. As a lawyer specializing in family law, he had seen many cases of child abuse, but something about the systematization of that violence disturbed him deeply. Damon, we can't wait any longer. I need you to give me all these recordings today. I'm going to contact Child Protective Services and the district attorney. This child needs to be removed from that house immediately. While the two men planned the intervention, across the street, Lily was living another day of terror. Carol had woken up with a particularly severe hangover and discovered that there was no more alcohol at home. Her irritation multiplied when she found new drawings of birds that Lily had made on the kitchen wall during the early morning. "How many times do I have to tell you not to get charcoal on the walls?" Carol screamed, holding Lily by the arm hard enough to leave marks. "You're a plague, a curse on this house." Lily tried to explain, to say that she had dreamed of her mother and that the drawings made her feel less alone, but the words were lost in sobs. At 4 years old, she still didn't fully understand why her aunt hated her so much, why each day brought new pain. "You're going to be locked in your room until I decide what to do with you," Carol continued, pushing the girl down the hall. "And if I hear so much as a peep, you'll experience a punishment you've never experienced before." The room where Lily was locked was small and stuffy, with only a high window that she couldn't reach. There, she huddled in the corner and began to sing softly her mother's lullaby, the melody being her only source of comfort in a world that seemed to have forgotten that she existed. It was that lullaby that Mary heard when she passed by the Smith house on her way to the grocery store. The retired teacher had spent the entire night thinking about her conversation with Lily in the backyard, about the marks she had seen on the child's arms, about the atmosphere of fear that permeated that house. Mary stopped in front of the gate and listened. Lily's voice was weak, but full of a sadness that made the teacher's heart break. At that moment, she made a decision that would change everything. Instead of going to the grocery store, Mary headed directly to the center of Harper's Ferry, where the small office of Child Protective Services was located. She knew the counselor Anna Beatriz well, a former student of hers who had dedicated herself to the protection of vulnerable children. "Anna, I need to talk to you about a very serious situation," said Mary, entering the office without ceremony. Anna Beatriz looked up from the papers she was reviewing. "Mrs. Santos, it's good to see you. What brings you here today?" "A child in danger. My neighbor. I'm sure she's being mistreated." Anna straightened up in her chair, her expression becoming immediately serious. During her 5 years as a Child Protective Services counselor, she had learned to recognize when a report was serious, and Mary Santos was not the type of person who would make frivolous accusations. "Tell me everything," said Anna, picking up a report form. While Mary reported her observations on the other side of town, Bob Mendez was in a similar meeting at the district attorney's office. District Attorney Lucas Andrade listened attentively while Bob presented the evidence collected by Damon. "This is compelling evidence," said the DA, examining the videos on Bob's cell phone. "I will order an immediate investigation and request the removal of the child from the family environment." "How long will this take?" asked Bob, worried. "With this evidence, we can act today," replied Lucas. "I'm contacting Child Protective Services now." Thus, by a coincidence that would change Lily's destiny, 2 simultaneous reports reached Child Protective Services on the same morning. Anna Beatriz was finishing writing down Mary's report when her phone rang. "Child Protective Services. Anna Beatriz speaking." "Anna, this is District Attorney Lucas Andrade. I need you to make an urgent intervention at a house on Brick Street. We have evidence of serious child abuse." Anna paused, her pen suspended over the paper. "Is it number 127 by any chance? The yellow Victorian house?" "Exactly. How did you know?" "I just received a report about the same house," Anna replied, looking at Mary in surprise. two independent sources. This confirms the seriousness of the situation. At 2 in the afternoon, a coordinated operation was being set up. Anna Beatrice, accompanied by 2 social workers and a court officer, was heading to Brick Street. Mary had offered to accompany the team, using her experience with traumatized children. Damon watched everything from his window, his heart pounding in his chest. Finally, after days of paralysis, he had managed to act. Bob was by his side, both witnessing the moment that would change Lily's life forever. "You did the right thing," said Bob, placing his hand on his friend's shoulder. "I hope it's not too late," Damon replied, his eyes fixed on the team approaching the Victorian house. In the Smith house, Carol had gone out to buy alcohol at Tony's bar, leaving Lily locked in the stuffy room. The girl continued to sing softly, unaware that her life was about to change radically. When Anna Beatrice knocked on the door of the Victorian house and received no answer, she used her legal authority to enter the property. What they found inside exceeded even their worst expectations. A dirty and poorly maintained house, a strong smell of alcohol, and clear signs of neglect in every room. It was Mary who first heard the weak voice coming from the room in the back. "Someone's here," she said, guiding the team down the hall. When they opened the door to the room and found Lily huddled in the corner, singing her sad lullaby, everyone present felt a pang in their heart. The girl raised her big, scared eyes, not understanding who these people were or what they wanted from her. "Hi, my dear," said Anna Beatrice, squatting down to be at the child's height. "My name is Anna. We've come to help you." Lily looked at Mary, recognizing the kind lady who had talked to her in the backyard. A flicker of hope shone in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by fear. "Aunt Carol will be mad," she whispered. "You don't need to worry about that now," said Mary, reaching out to the girl. "We're going to get out of here, okay?" And so, after 8 months of silent suffering, Lily was finally removed from the house, where she had known only pain and fear. Damon watched from the window as the small figure was carried out, protected by Mary's arms. 3 months later, Lily was temporarily living with Mary, who had volunteered as a foster family. Damon, moved by guilt and the affection he had developed for Joanne's daughter, had decided to adopt her officially. The scars on her arms were healing, as were the wounds on her heart. Carol was convicted of the abuse and forced to undergo treatment for alcoholism. Lily, for the first time in her life, knew what it was to be truly loved and protected, growing up surrounded by the affection of Damon and Mary, who became her new chosen family. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving it a score from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.